Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Cruiser Chat with Otram. Um, Again, I don't have anything planned, so whatever questions you've got, you can either use the link that I just put in the chat box, or and that'll let you like call in live like a Zoom meeting, or you can just type them in the chat box. And for some reason, it's not kicking all of the chats over to me. I just noticed there's some already in the YouTube window. One from Sean Wilson asking if the new timing covers on a 1FC come with the FIPG groove in them. The ones I've gotten from ASIN just have the groove above the oil pump, and that's it. And you just put it, just around the edge of the timing cover. But yeah, there's not a groove. Oop. Sorry, hit the microphone. There's not a groove that goes all the way around. So yeah, that's the way I've seen probably the last 4 or 5 that we've done. They don't have a groove all the way around. Just the little like 2 grooves right above where the oil pump sits. And kind of along the lines of that, we've had multiple come through lately. 1FZs with oil leaks, and it looks like it's coming from the oil pump cover. The old, it's always the oil pump cover. But we've had several come through in the last 2 weeks that it's actually the O-ring between the timing cover and the block starting to leak, which is much more of a pain than doing oil pump cover because heads got to come off, oil pans come off to get the timing cover out. So it's a much bigger job. So it looks like that's going to start being a more common thing because we'd only seen a couple of them over the last few years, but we've seen, I think, 3 in the last 2 weeks. So not a great thing. Oh, and I was going to mention I was on the Classic Cruisers podcast with Dan Simpson. I think we recorded that Monday, and it came out maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. So if you haven't listened to his podcast, check it out. It was kind of cool. It was the first time I'd ever been on a podcast. Like I've done, tons of videos and these live chats, but I'd never been on somebody else's podcast. So that was kind of cool. I'm sorry, just checking the the chat box on my phone just to make sure I'm not missing. Make sure I'm not missing anything because I'm not seeing them pop through on here. So if you got any questions, either use the link or ask them in the chat box, and I will see what I can do about answering them. Oh, and Sean's question about the timing covers did come through. It just came through before mine, or before I posted, so I didn't see it. And question, just bought 97 Land Cruiser, 125K, drove it home from Seattle, Washington to South Texas without issues. What should be a good listing of parts to replace preventatively? We get so many people that they want to come through and like baseline. And what we always tell them is, bring it in, let us look the truck over, and see what it actually needs. Because so often people just replace everything, and you don't need to. Um, I would, if you don't have service history or Carfax showing, what's been serviced, I would start with fluids. Um, but, other than that, I would just check everything over really well. You know, there's not like a list of things that fail. It's just going to be maintenance stuff like, the belts, the hoses, spark plug wires, cap and rotor, the knuckles. But, depending on how the truck's been maintained or not maintained, will dictate what actually needs to be replaced. Um, I would, personally, I would drive it for a while, enjoy it, see what it needs. Um, before just, buying a whole bunch of parts for it. Unless you really want to, it's your truck. If you just want to replace everything, that's totally up to you. But I would drive it, enjoy it, and see what it needs instead of just replacing stuff from a list. And then another question, brother-in-law has a nice 96 or 97, but it has a strange vibration. He says he's been hunting down. Yeah. Um, Vibration, noise, that's not something you're really going to diagnose, over the internet. If you've got a description of it, I can give you places to check, but that is a really hard thing to go through without, uh, without hearing it, feeling it, driving it. It's going to be real hard to try to give you any real distinct direction on it. And let's see, the truck in question, just bought one, has crusty looking red fluid in the radiator. Do you think I should fully flush it and swap to green? The red is the Toyota Long Life. That's what we leave in them. Like if they come in with green in them, we keep green in them. If they've got red in them, we leave red in them. The new stuff, if it's got pink, we leave pink. The red is, a longer lasting coolant than the green. The only issue I see with the red is if you're traveling somewhere remote and you can't easily replace it if you need it. But you just carry red with you and that problem's solved. But I would leave red in it. I would, check it for strength and check it for pH. And if it needs to be changed, I would just change it with more red from Toyota. Um, and Blake says 271,000 on his 80. Oil analysis shows elevated bearing wear metal, no knocking or any other trouble signs on the oil analysis. Should I try to slip in a new main and rod bearings? At 271, I wouldn't. I don't think you're gonna get good results from that. Anytime you want the crank to be polished, you want the crank to be checked for size, because you got to match the bearings, to the crank. So if the crank's worn and you put standard size bearings on it, you're going to have screwy oil pressure. If the bearing or the crank's got any scoring in it, you're just going to wipe the new bearings. The only way I would do that is if it was like you had no other choice and you had to drive cross country, and it had to be done. Otherwise, I would just let it be and plan for an engine rebuild in the future, because the chances of that actually being a lasting repair aren't great. And MJ says he has a 94 getting ABS code 32 and 35. Is a 95 wheel speed sensor compatible with the 94? any pointers to look out for? I don't know if those are compatible or not. Your Toyota dealer would be your best choice or best source for info on that. Um, my screen locked up. That's going to be like Toyota's going to be your best source for compatibility. I would bet that they aren't between 94 and 95 just because they changed all the other computer stuff, but they might be. And you're going to just have to start with electrical troubleshooting to see why the sensors aren't working, like if it's got a broken wire. But what we do see a lot of is either like if it's a front sensor, the Burfield's wearing and getting metal shavings on the tip of the sensor because they're magnetic, and then the sensor doesn't read right, or rust under the where the sensor mounts, and it lifts the sensor up just enough that it doesn't read the tone ring correctly anymore. So it can be just physical issues as well. And you could also have, the tone ring, if the Burfield's worn out enough and the spindle bearings are worn out enough and the axle itself is moving up and down with the tone ring, that'll change your air gap and it'll, make the sensors not read properly. So it's really hard to tell without digging into it. It's not always the sensors. And I don't think I've actually ever had to replace sensors on an 80 series that wasn't because of like physical damage to the wires. It's always been something else. Not saying it can't be sensors, just I haven't seen sensors on an 80 fail yet. And Charleston says he's got 80 new pads, rotors, booster, and master cylinder installed from previous owner. It pulls to the left during hard braking, is less noticeable when not braking hard. I would be checking calipers for sticking as my first go. Because if a caliper is either sticking and not applying or sticking on, it's going to pull because you're going to have uneven brake force side to side. I would also check the soft lines because those can rip internally and get like a flap of rubber, and it'll let the fluid down, brakes apply, but it won't let the fluid back, and that can cause pulling. So I would check calipers first. If you've got like a cheap infrared temperature gun, you can go take it for a drive and then, come home and quickly get out and check the temperature on the calipers or the rotors. And if you've got a massive temperature difference somewhere, that's the caliper I'd be looking at. Questions are coming in too fast. Speedo goes nuts. It will jump up to 150 miles an hour, but the RPM stays stable to the speed which the car is going. I've already changed the speed sensor on the transfer case and electrical issue in the dash. If you've already changed the speed sensor on the transfer case and it's a known good and factory Toyota part, I would bet that it's in the dash. You'd need an oscilloscope to watch the signal to really know for sure. But yeah, either that, I guess it could be wiring, but I don't see how a wiring fault would make it jump way high. So I would guess it's the actual speedometer itself failing. But again, I've never seen an 80 series have a speedo fail. I don't think I've ever done a speed sensor on one either. It's always just been crushed wiring on there. Ooh. And Brian says he's got a 97 LX450, 250,000 miles, exhaust needs replacement. Better replace or delete the cats. I leave the cats. Even though you have no emissions testing in your area, it is still federal emissions tampering to delete them. So yeah, you might not get busted on it, but the cats are there for a reason. They make your exhaust not smell horrible. I won't put a truck together without cats. So I would leave them. And Chris wants to know, do we see many customers or issues from melted wiring harness due to the EGR on the 1FZ? Yes, just about every 1FZ that comes through has some sort of melted wiring. It may not be presenting a problem, but there's melted wiring back there. So whenever we're back in that area, excuse me, got the hiccups. Whenever we're back in that area, we'll retape the harness and add it's like a gold fiberglass heat reflective wrap to it to keep the heat out of the harness. Yeah, because I mean, it's a hot area with the harness right there. So anything you can do to help. So we just wrap them as a preventative. And I get asked on EGR delete every single one of these podcasts. Don't do it. It's there for a reason. And again, it's federal emissions tampering. Uh, and the computer was designed to fuel the truck with the EGR there. It's not hurting anything. It is not the 1970s. Leave the EGR alone. It is not evil. Um, yeah, I don't know why EGR has been so vilified. I mean, it's the 1MC has a lot of problems with the light coming on for, low flow. So we do the HUD Expo uh, temp sensor test plug that keeps the check engine light from coming on, but leave the EGR, let it do what it's going to do. Because it's my understanding that it's supposed to help with ping at highway cruising. So I would leave it alone um, and let it do its thing. Yeah, like the old trucks, like the with the 2Fs, 2F and 3F, that had actual EGR valve problems, and where the EGR was kind of slapped on there to meet emissions, maybe I could see minor benefit there with getting rid of it, but still, I would just leave it. Um, yeah. Um, and 1540 or 1550 good oil with 300,000. It's all going to depend on how worn your engine is. On my 80, I run 1540 Rotella in it because if I run like the 530 or 1030 that it's spec'd at, I have like 4 psi of hot oil pressure. With 1540, I get like 12. So my engine is really worn. On an engine that's still got tight bearings, I probably wouldn't run 1540. Just lost my train of thought. But yeah, it's going to depend on how worn the engine is. Like on a brand new fresh motor, I wouldn't run 1540. We run 530 or 1030 in those. Really worn out engine, 1540 is fine. I would just you know go, and the factory gauge on the dash isn't really what I would go by. I've got a digital gauge plumbed in on mine, so I have a more definitive answer. But yeah, likely you're fine with 1540 on a 300,000 mile motor. I would just watch what your oil pressure does in cold weather, because you don't want cold flow issues. If it's really cold out in the winter. Um, Distributor timing still set to the stock. I think it's 3 degrees. Um, the mileage doesn't dictate the distributor setting. Um, you might be able to advance it a little bit, to get a little bit more power out of it, but you've got to be really careful doing that because you can introduce spark knock very easily. Like my old 22RE, I ran like 13 degrees of base timing in that, but you had to run it on premium or it knocked like crazy. So you just got to be real careful if you play with timing. But, we just set all of them at I'm pretty sure it's 3 is the factory timing. It's been way too long since I've timed an 80, if I can't remember it off the top of my head. But it's under the hood on the sticker that has the vacuum diagram. I'm pretty sure it shows the timing. And you want to make sure when you're timing it that you've got the pins in the little diagnostic port jumped, because that'll lock the timing. If you try to time it without jumping those, the timing is going to be trying to adjust while you're doing it, and you will not get an accurate reading. I think it's T1 and E1 that get jumped, but double check a manual before you trust me on that. And hopefully I caught all those. Like, it was a flurry of questions that came through, and the chat window on the software I was using froze, and it wasn't letting me scroll. So hopefully I got everybody. And next question was how often to flush the tranny fluid from the pan and let them know when their quota is over for questions. No quota on questions. We recommend transmission fluid every 60K. The older trucks may be shorter of a time frame than that. I'd have to look it up, but nobody ever does it anyway. So we just use 60K as a happy medium between people never doing it and us suggesting like, hey, you should do this for proper transmission life. And at least on like the WS transmission fluid on like the 100 series and newer, 60K seems to be a good compromise of when it starts to get burnt looking. Much past 60K and it's not looking great, and it's, it starts to smell burnt, starts to smell broken down, and it gets, brown, black, instead of that nice cherry red. I just did a 200 series today, that we did the trans fluid on it, just a drain and fill a couple years ago, and I redid it today. And I forgot to look up how many miles. I want to say it was like 40 or 50K on it since we did it before, and it was still good cherry red looking fluid. Principal Kidswater has a good question. Any advice on a young guy wanting to learn the mechanic trade and possibly pursuing it professionally? Been learning the basics on my own on my first car. So you could go to school, like community college or one of those. I don't have a super amount of faith in those programs just because of the people I've seen come out of them. They seem to teach the basics, but just not common sense and reading technical proficiency. Like reading the manual and reading for comprehension seems to be the most important part, especially as stuff is getting way more complex. Like reading comprehension. That is the most important part of being a mechanic. Uh, Everything else you can learn. I came into this in a roundabout way. I never went to school for auto repair and never technically worked as an auto mechanic before I started my own shop. Uh, I was a body man and painter by trade, and I went through apprenticing for that. I just got hired as a body shop helper and worked my way up as I learned. And I did that for a little over a decade. And when the body shop side would get slow, I would do mechanical work on the mechanical side of the business. So I picked up a lot from, the older guys in the shop there, but then, everything else I've learned from, YouTube, forums, online training classes, video training classes, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of ways to learn. The easiest is probably going to be apprenticing somewhere, starting as a shop helper, and a grunt and working your way up. That'll probably get you the fastest career path. But it's also going to come down to finding the right shop and finding somebody that's older that'll take you under their wing and teach you, because there's a lot of guys that aren't going to teach the new guy. And they're going to want to try to keep all the knowledge to themselves. So it's really important. Like when I was coming up, I worked in shops that had great, older generation guys that taught me what I needed to know. So finding a good shop is going to be paramount to that. And if you need to jump shops, when you're starting out, to find somebody that'll teach you, that's probably what you'd have to do. It is not an easy trade. I feel like there are a lot easier ways to make money, but if you're really passionate about it, it can be a lot of fun. I really like what I do, but there's some days that it absolutely sucks. Luckily, the good days outweigh those. And what are my thoughts on the two-wheel drive part-time conversion on a triple locked 80? I was against these for forever, because the whole appeal of the 80 is that it's all-wheel drive, and in the snow, it's awesome. It's all-wheel drive. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to go out of two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, all that jazz. That said, we've done a couple of them, for guys that have like bigger tires, and they make the steering a lot lighter. They make the road handling, quite a bit nicer, when you're not spinning the front axle and driving it. So I have softened on my views of the part-time kits being not worthwhile. I still like my 80 being all-wheel drive. I won't ever put a part-time kit in my personal truck, but I can see the advantage, especially with big tires, making the handling on the street nicer. Um, and I know with the Land Cruiser, the 200 series, there's a spot on the trans to place a paper clip to allow fluid to flow through the cooler. Is that the case for the 80? Uh, no, the 80 doesn't have the thermostat like the 200 series does. And it's funny, I actually just filmed a 200 series trans fluid change video today and had to do the whole stupid paperclip thing. Um, and so yeah, there's nothing like that on the 80. I would not do any kind of flush. I just do drain and fills. Um, I don't like using any kind of like flush machines because I've just heard too many horror stories of, stirring up stuff moving around, the valve body getting stuck afterward. So just drain and fill. And, if you're really wanting to get a lot of new fluid in there, drain and fill a couple of times. Like I've seen the people take the cooler lines off and drain it into a bucket while you're adding trans fluid. And it seems like a really good idea until you stop adding fluid fast enough and run the trans dry. And that is always my concern with that. It's like, yeah, that might work, but that one time that you do not keep up with filling the trans while it's pumping fluid out of the cooler and you smoke the trans, that just got real expensive real fast. So I just do drain and fills. Oh, and somebody said also of note, went to a dealership yesterday to order main and rod bearings, and the rod bearings for LC are discontinued. Um, I guess it's been forever since I've tried to order rod bearings, but they do come in multiple sizes, so they may still have some of the sizes left. Um, yeah, but lately we've just been using Remand engines. Um, we used to get the factory short blocks and rebuild the heads, but we've had so many heads be not salvageable lately that we've just moved to using Remand engines from the guys that rebuild them for Toyota. And knock on wood, those have been awesome. Crash is working on installing one right now. He just got the old engine out and he's got everything swapped over to the new one. And Chris says it's crazy that the drain and fill on the A343 is 3 quarts, but the capacity is around 12. Yeah. Usually, like if I let it sit there and drain for a while, I usually get like 3.5, 4 out of it. Um, but yeah, you're not getting much out at a time. So depending on how the fluid looks, you may need to drain and fill it a couple of times, with a run cycle in between to mix everything up. Um, and you're not getting a true recycle because you're always going to have old fluid mixed in doing it that way. But like if you stay on top of it, on intervals moving forward, it seems to, stay, you don't get, degraded fluid as quickly. So, each interval, you're adding 3 quarts of fresh. Um, and it seems to be much easier to maintain, fresh fluid moving forward that way once you've done it a couple of times. And I don't know where the rest of the fluid is because I can't imagine there's nine. Well, there can't be 9 quarts in the torque converter. So I don't know where all the stuff that's not draining out is hanging out. I can't imagine that there's more than a gallon in the torque converter. And I mean, I guess you've got some up in the cooler and in the lines. But even then, I can't imagine it's that much, that high a volume. That's pretty awesome. Uh, I have a US spec 96 triple locked sitting in Peru that I use to travel South America with. I'm finishing up the trip now. So if you want or know anybody that wants to explore South America, that would be awesome. I love South America. My first real out of the country trip, not Canada, was Peru. When my wife and I got married, we did our honeymoon in Cusco and Machu Picchu, and Peru was amazing. And we've done a bunch of South and Central American countries since, and I really love South and Central America. And it would be awesome to be able to just drive around and explore. But I can't leave the shop. And Chris wants to know, what's my favorite color that you've seen on any Land Cruiser? Um, that new kind of, I don't know if you call it slate blue, but the newest Land Cruiser, the blue that's on that, I really like that. Um, I also like the old blue that was on the 40 series. Um, yeah, and a red 80. I really like the red on the 80 series. My least favorite color is the champagne, like LX 450 color, which of course is what mine is. But I hate that color. Luckily, you don't see very many of those anymore. But yeah, the new Land Cruiser, when I first saw it, I wasn't sure about it, but it's growing on me, and I really like that blue. What's the most miles on an FJ80 that I've seen? I got to see them with over 1 million miles in Bolivia, and Bolivia is the reason why the 80 is expensive in the US now. They were all exported to Bolivia. I'm trying to think. I want to say high 400s, like 480, 485, something like that. I don't know that we've had an 80 series come through with over 500K on it. Um, it's not super common for us to see them with over 400. High threes is the highest we normally see. We've got a couple of them in the mid 400s that come through, but most of them, most of the high mileage ones we see are like upper threes. Mine's got 360-ish on it. So not a ton, but more than most. I would say the average 80 we see is like 250, 275. We'd been talking about going to Ecuador for our next trip, but it's looking like it may be Iceland for the solar eclipse this summer, which I am all for going back to Iceland. I loved Iceland. Wasn't a fan of getting COVID there, but the country was awesome. Artemis is so curled up in a ball behind me, I didn't even notice that she was in frame on the camera. Did you see any Arctic cruisers in Iceland? I didn't. at least not any of like the official Arctic cruisers. I saw a bunch of really big GXs, uh, and a couple of big 80s, but we didn't actually go to the Arctic truck, uh, I guess, factory. Um, when my parents and brother went a couple of years ago, they went and actually checked out Arctic trucks. But when my wife and I went, we did the ring road and drove all the way around. So our trip was driving, hiking, driving, hiking, driving, hiking, with no stops to go see trucks. It was waterfalls, hiking trails, puffins, and exhausting, but amazing. Yeah, Iceland is very high on the list of countries that I'd go back to, and very high on the list of countries that I would move to. Same with Norway. And wants to know, what is my trick to set axle bearing preloads? I'm assuming you're talking about the front bearings. And the way I do them is the inner nut, I crank it down to around 50-ish foot-pounds, spin the axle or spin the hub, multiple times one direction, spin the hub multiple times the other direction. I back it off, or back the nut off, put it back till it's finger tight, and then tighten it like an eighth to a quarter of a turn more. I know, like, there's the Toyota manual spec, you torque it to this and then you check the preload and all that. I've never had great luck with it. The way I was taught to do it, in the shop that I started out at was, you tighten it to roughly 50, spin it, loosen it, finger tight, eighth to a quarter of a turn. The only problem with describing doing it that way is that you also need to know what the proper feel is, for the preload, which is what dictates that eighth to quarter. Um, I would imagine, as long as you're, eighth to a quarter, you're going to be fine in that preload range. Because it's hard to convey the way they're actually supposed to feel. Like, there should be some drag on them when they're tight. They shouldn't, free spin. It's just knowing how much drag feels right. And that's just something you get a feel for after years and years of doing it. So yeah, barring that, the safest way is probably doing it, the factory manual way of, setting it by torque and then using a fish scale to check preload, to make sure that you're right. It's the same like doing differentials, like in setting pinion preload. I've done so many hundreds of gears. I can do preload by feel, and then I check it with an actual drag wrench, and I can be within, an inch pound or so of drag after doing it so many times. Um, but yeah, it's one of those, you just, you build up a feel for it. Um, and Mudlife says he's changing out ball joints uh, on the drag link and new steering dampener. Which side is right hand thread and which side is left hand thread? I have no idea. I do them one at a time, and I match the threads on the tie rods when I put them back, or on the tie rod ends when I put them back in. Uh, but yeah, aftermarket stuff, like aftermarket tie rods, there'll be a groove cut on the end that's left hand thread, but the factory stuff, there's not. And depending on which way the guy put it in last time, it could be, either direction. So I just, I check them, and half the time it's like putting in the old USB plugs. You check it multiple times before you get it right. Um, and Chris wants to know, do we see many sunroof failures on the 80 series? Is there any preventative maintenance that can be done? We don't see a whole lot of failures, but we also don't work on sunroofs. Um, I I shuffle all that off to a body shop because I'm not taking headliners and all that jazz down to deal with them. Um, I don't know really that there's much preventative maintenance you can do because I don't, with the sunroof cassette in, I don't know that you can actually get at anything to lube it. Um, so yeah, I don't know, other than keeping the sunroof drains clean, I don't know that there's much maintenance you could do. Um, and I think I've only seen one or two failures in the 80 sunroof, and I want to say it's like when you open them, they kind of pop down and tilt. It's the little arm that tilts it on the ones we've seen has broken off. But it's been many years since I've seen that. And Jack says, "Good evening, spend the day trying to tint the windows on his LX. I do not envy you. I've tried tinting windows before, and I learned that that is not a skill that I am ever going to possess, and it is so worth the money to pay a professional window tinter to do it. Uh, Even the flat windows at the shop, like just regular windows. Uh, I tried tinting those, and yeah, they look horrible. So yeah, don't envy you. I don't know what it is about window tint, but that is not something I can do. Graphics down the side of a vehicle, not a problem. Window tint, can't do it. He says, "Yep, learning the hard way." Yeah, the one of the shops I worked for, it was like an off-road shop, like did lift kits and tires, but we also did car stereos, bed liners, and we had mobile guys that came in window tinted out of the shop. And watching those guys tint windows, that was an art form. Like they had that down to a science and made it look easy. And every time I've ever tried, it has not been easy. Um, and do you ever see coolant leaks from the hose under the throttle body on the 1FC? Yeah, quite regularly actually. The funny thing is, there's the little short straight one that comes from the pipe that wraps around by the distributor. We hardly ever see that one leak. It's always the one coming off the back of the throttle body that goes down to the side of the head under the intake. We see that one leak all the time, uh, often enough that when we do valve cover gaskets and have the throttle body off to the valve cover gasket, we keep them in stock to replace them when we're doing that job because we see them leak so often. And it's not a bad hose to replace. It's the 4 bolts on the throttle body. You don't have to take all the throttle cables and all that jazz off. Just unplug the electrical plugs and the vacuum hoses for the EGR, and you can just pop it forward enough to get to that, to either of the hoses with a pair of needle nose pliers to get the spring clamps. The head side of it's a little trickier. Um, because it's a lot easier, if you jack it up and take the wheel off and go in through the wheel well. But not a super bad hose to replace. I would get the springy hose clamps when you get the new hose, because chances are those clamps are worn out. Like the radiator ones seem to be more reusable. Like they don't seem to wear out, but the little ones, like on the heater hoses and the throttle body hoses, seem to wear out more, and they don't want to spring tight enough to seal. So we always replace the clamps as well. And I think that hose is still reasonably priced too. I want to say it's less than $20. We see those leak a lot, and we see the two, like the breather and the PCV hose that come off the valve cover. Those are always rock hard, and never get replaced. So we keep those in stock too, and replace them all the time. And Charleston wants to know, what is Otram? Where did the name come from? So before I moved into the shop that I'm in now, when I very first started the business, I was mobile. Like, had a toolbox in a van, went to people's houses, fixed their cars there, and was doing Land Cruisers at the house here. So the original business name was On the Road Again Mobile Mechanic. And when I moved into the shop, I didn't want to, rename and do all the paperwork. So I just shortened it down to the acronym, because our email and website were already Otram, because the original website and original email were spelled out On the Road Again Mobile Mechanic. And it was just way too long of a website or email address. So, we quickly shortened it to just the acronym. So people were calling us Otram anyway from the shortened up email. So it just made sense when we moved into the brick and mortar shop to just, change the name to Otram and rock out that way. An 80 tranny are known to heat up on moderate challenges. What is the best upgrade to improve tranny cooling on an 80? So I've never heard that they have heat problems before. I've never seen, like, the only 80 series trans we've ever replaced was because they sunk it in a mud hole and got mud water in the trans. Like my truck, when I put the turbo on it, when we first went out to test drive it, and you'd floor it, the 1-2 shift it would start at like 2,500 and end at 5,000. So it was like slipping horribly. So I put one of the wholesale automatic valve bodies in it, and I put, a big trans cooler, on the front. And I did them both at the same time, so I don't know which one had the bigger effect. Was it, the big tranny cooler, or the valve body, keeping things from slipping, keeping the temp down? But my trans temps never get warm anymore. Like, I can drive, highway driving all day long, and they don't go over 115. Lugging around low range on a trail, crawling, maybe I hit 120 degrees on the trans fluid. And I would guess it's the large cooler that I put up front. I put the largest, tranny cooler that I could fit in front of the radiator. So I'm guessing that's what's keeping it cool. But I am not sure. And Chris wants to know, have I ever installed or seen an engine block heater on a 1FZ? I have not. Um, I'm trying to think. I think I've seen one on a 2F. Um, but I don't think I've ever seen one on a 1FC. And uh, if you wanted wants to know if I'm still doing phone call-ins for these chats or just the typing chat. Yes, at the very top of the chat window, there is a link. And if you click that link, it works like a Zoom link, and you can join live via audio, video, like same as doing a Zoom call. So yes, you could still call in live. It just seems like most people are still doing the type in chats. It was maybe the second one of these that I did. Somebody called in, but we've only had one call in since I switched back to doing this on YouTube. And Benjamin says just tuned in and trans temps are exactly what he needs to figure out. Yeah, and I mean it's also going to depend on where you're measuring fluid temperature from. Like I'm measuring it in the pan with just a temp sensor. I've also seen people measure it, on the outlet going to the cooler. Which will give you a vastly different temperature reading than reading it from the pan. So everybody's temp readings are going to be a bit different, depending on where they're mounting their temp sensors. And somebody says, what about transfer case temps? I don't have a leak, but I feel a lot of heat from the center console. I've I hesitate to say I've never seen tranny temp or transfer case temp problems because I have seen multiple 80 series transfer cases with melted gears in them. But all of those have been the result of running them without fluid in them, and not having fluid in them is what made the high temperature that melted the gears. I think what you're actually feeling as far as, heat from the center console is the fact that, it's a big straight six with a cast iron block, a big transmission. It's a big mass of metal radiating heat. And, you've also got the exhaust, and the two cats, although they're on the outside of the frame rail, that heat's still going to migrate up to the center, especially like sitting at a stoplight, heat's going to rise, it's going to come up there. So I don't think you can gauge actual driveline temperature based on the heat that you're feeling like radiating inside the cab. And on an HDJ, I have no idea. Again, I would just assume it is just concentrated heat because as it blows through the radiator past the engine, that's the way it's moving, is down the trans tunnel, and it's going to heat up. It's going to heat up the floor. It's going to heat up the center console. Everything like that sitting there. So I don't know that you can really judge the temperatures of the driveline based on what's radiating, because I'm pretty sure it's just radiant heat, moving back down the tunnel. But yeah, if your T case is full with the proper fluid in it and isn't leaking, I wouldn't be overly concerned about it. Because the only time I've seen the 80 series transfer cases melt and explode it's because they haven't had any fluid in them. And Chris wants to know, any issues running the 180 series in 4 low in overdrive for long periods of time? I honestly don't know. Like, when I'm out wheeling, I'll just throw it in low, and and let the automatic run through its gears. And I'll drive. I'm probably getting up to 25, 30 miles an hour doing that. Um, but I've never actually checked fluid temperatures or checked anything like that to see what the actual effect is. Um, so I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you on that. And what's the highest altitude I've seen an 80 series taken to? Um, Around here, maybe 800 feet, 900 feet. We don't really have any altitude. I'm in Virginia, basically sea level. Um, I guess I've seen 80s in Cusco, which is, I think, closing in on 14,000 feet. Um, and I've seen them, in Colorado at 12 or 13,000. But, I don't know about anything up much higher than that. And Benjamin wants to know, what's the easiest way to check transfer case fluid? There's only one way to check the transfer case fluid. There's a 24 millimeter fill plug on the back of it. You open that up. If fluid trickles out, you're good. If fluid doesn't trickle out, stick your pinky in the hole and see if you can reach fluid. If the fluid's just right below the edge of the fill plug, you're still good. If you can't reach fluid, you need fluid. And it looks like we're bumping up to 9 o'clock, and my throat is killing me from allergies. So I'm going to go ahead and jump off of here for the evening. But I'll be back next Thursday, assuming I get all my packing done in time, because we're taking a hiking trip that Friday morning. But I should be here next Thursday. So yeah, thanks to everybody that tuned in and asked questions, because this doesn't work without people asking questions. Yeah, enjoyed chatting with everybody, and I will catch you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in.